Hey everyone, Broman Jenkins here. First off, I wanted to thank everyone for the very positive response to the B-36 video I did. I wasn't expecting that. I was just kind of talking about something I like to talk about sometimes that no one likes to listen to. Figured with a captive audience I'd do better. But I wanted to follow it up with something someone suggested, which was talking about other military programs in the Cold War to kind of go along with this. And I think the original suggestion was something like the SR-71, but I kind of wanted to take it back, kick it old school to the U-2, which is the 3-kill streak and the 4-kill streak, which is weird because in the 60s they never really outfitted this thing with a electronics warfare package. So the U-2, and I'm going to have to pace myself on this because it's hard not to talk about one person with this program, and that is Clarence Kelly Johnson. He was and is basically the father of modern military aviation. We don't recognize individual people anymore for a lot of their efforts. I can't name the one person who's designing or was the brainchild behind a particular engine anymore. But you can kind of point to him for a lot of stuff we see to this day. We're talking about early stealth technology. We're talking about the first fighter jet that was actually used by the U.S. Air Force, and that was designed and built in 143 days. If I told somebody that's how long they had to design to get a minor change to a part that's already built, they would fucking freak out. So bear with me. The guy was brilliant, and he was very he had a strict moral code, sort of. He almost quit Lockheed in the 70s when it came out that Lockheed was paying governments to buy planes from them, bribing, basically. They had to kind of calm him down and explain that all the people who were responsible left the company, but he was still pissed. So he's notable for those two things especially. Now, the U-2, more than any other plane, was sort of accidental. And that's not saying it was bad or there was a bad design or there was an early prototype that kind of got fucked up. I'm saying that it was completely accidental because it was never requested. This happens all the time in military stuff when contracts are out there. For example, right now the GE is trying to push the 136 engine for the F-35. But they don't know what the pylon configuration looks like, so the Pratt & Whitney F-35 135 engine is kind of winning out in that competition. But Lockheed thought they had something because they had Kelly Johnson in there, so they had him go design something, and he kind of used parts from a P-108 plane he had designed, and he took an engine he already knew, which was the J-79, which is fairly common in military projects. To be able to use interchangeable engines, it's sort of a devil you know thing. If you have a known quantity engine, it's much easier to design around that and accept it. It's similar to why the new military tanker is going to use a PW4000 engine. It's reliable, it's well known, it's got a good support system, all that. So with that in mind, he put together a pretty brilliant little plane. It didn't win the competition, which was not really unexpected. He came in with this very strange landing and takeoff system, but it caught the eye of a few people, and eventually it got its way to Dwight Eisenhower, who allowed for $22 million to the CIA instead of the Air Force, who had run the competition, to start procuring these things. So in 1955, the prototype of the plane that was not shown there, but the prototype of what would be the finished plane. I think they'd probably call it like Block 30 back in the day. Took off. It wasn't supposed to. It was actually supposed to be a high-speed taxi, but it took off because the long glider wings on it actually allowed enough air to get underneath, and the airspeed was able to be low enough that at about 60 miles an hour it just left the ground. Airspeed and lift is, a main factor in a high-altitude spy plane like this. But you also saw it in the B-36, where it six engines and very, very long wings allowed it to get to high heights. Um, of course, when you only have one engine, you kind of run into a few issues. One is redundancy, you don't have any. But the other is balancing. Now, most of the time, you just put it right underneath the body of the plane and call it a day, which is exactly what the U-2 did. But it also had to fit the camera equipment, which was massive. We're talking bigger than, the stereotypical Hollywood camera. And it actually ran on an interesting configuration with the film going forward and back in the plane. With one half would come from the forward side part of the plane, and another half would come from the aft part. They'd lock in, take the picture, and they'd slide away from each other. So you could actually just line it up with afterwards and take those and put them together. This is a balance issue. They were trying to make sure the plane would not go off balance for any reason. So if you had like a bunch of pictures on one side, the pictures taken, the negatives, just on one side of the plane, they were worried that it would be off balance and it would be much more difficult to control. It was already very difficult to control. The wings were not helping anything, but the fact that the stall speed on it and the top speed were something like, I don't know, 6-7 miles an hour apart, made it a very difficult plane to control and to predict anything on. Because of its high altitude, it also happened to experience flameouts, which is when the engine doesn't get enough air and it cannot actually produce a flame. And this is how Francis Gary Powers was shot down in 1960. So after his little Russian vacation, he came back. It was revealed that the CIA had these planes that were flying over Russia and all over the world. And then the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, and U-2s were there to take pictures of that. So we were all pretty good with them then. The U-2 would go on for years, actually. It still runs today. It was most recently seen in Libya, flying from a base in Cyprus to kind of get troop positions and movements. But it's also used for weather satellites, for actual satellite markups, trying to get benchmarks on them. And it's also used in a really interesting role now where we don't have Predator drones in the area, or we don't have satellites overhead, so we can send in a U-2. They're apparently still like bitches to fly. But in a lot of ways, those designs from the Cold War, despite how fast they were done, they're just really durable designs. They're really strong, and they're really good for a long, long period of time. So something really notable about the U-2, though, is that it really was the forerunner to the SR-71, which is an even more iconic plane. The SR would test in the same area and use a lot of the lessons learned during Project Rainbow, which was a CIA project to actually get the radar cross-section of the plane reduced significantly. It was a failure for the U-2, but it really came to its own and kind of proved its worth on the SR, and then later the B-2 Spirit bomber, the F-22 Raptor, and the F-35 fighter, Lightning II actually, which is a really dumb name because there's definitely other names you could do besides Lightning II. I still have a problem with that goddamn thing. So the U-2 is, really one of those great planes in American aviation history, whether you think of it as a defense-only thing, or if you think of it just in general as in terms of planes. It's just an amazing plane. It's been around for 50 years. It's hard to control, but it's still used. So I hope everyone learned something today, and maybe I'll do more of these. We'll see. Bye.